basically what's going to go on. Okay, so basically, okay. I got my tea, we're all good. Okay, so this is how we're going to do. You're going to give me your full name, tell me where you were born, and a little bit of background of the house you grew up in, parents, where they were from, where you were born.
Well, I'm Armand Lauffer. Middle name is Albert. I was born in Belgium. Came to the United States when I was 5 years old.
Where in Belgium?
In Antwerp is where I was born, but we lived in 2 other cities in Belgium. Came to the States when I was about 5, little over 5.
Look at me. Yeah.
A little over 5. We lived for a while in Brooklyn, just above a tiny kosher Jewish bread baker.
Where in Brooklyn was this? I think you should just sit back. You should sit back. Yeah, I need you to sit back. There we go. That's much better.
I think that was in Flatbush.
It was in Flatbush.
Yeah,
So wait, so you were born in Belgium?
Came to Flatbush, lived there for a month or 2. Later moved to Avenue K. Lived in an apartment for about 6 or 7 months. Then my father, who was a furrier, thought he ought to be working closer to where he could work as a furrier, which was in Manhattan. We moved to Manhattan for about a year. And at one point he decided that merchandising was better than manufacturing. So he arranged through a friend of his to come to Patterson, and the 2 of them opened up a fur store in Patterson, and it did fairly well, and it became 3 or 4 stores. Eventually it turned it into bought a hotel and turned the hotel into a department store, and they did fairly well until his partner. You want all this information?
Well, you know, you're telling it. It's fine.
His partner wanted to save European Jews, and he collected as much money as he could before the war started, during the war, and after the war.
And this gentleman's name?
Hlavna Aronson, but
what's that?
Hlavna Aronson, but I don't know you want to say anything more about it, because one of the things that he did is he took the money from the business without telling my father, and used the money to save Jews, which my father was happy he was doing, but didn't know he was taking it from the business. So the department store folded. Yeah, went under.
Tell me, why did what year were you born? You didn't tell me.
1933.
1933, and why did your parents leave in 1938? Why did they leave Belgium?
They left at the end of 38.
My father was warned by a member of the Congress in Belgium that he was on the list if the Germans ever invaded. My father had helped develop a boycott against German goods. He also smuggled Jews out of Germany before Kristallnacht when they were in trouble. So he was on the German wanted list. And
so a member of the Belgian. Hold on, a member of the Belgian.
Resistance.
A member of the Belgian Parliament.
A member of the German Parliament.
In Germany.
A member of the Belgian Parliament.
Right.
Told my father that
he tipped him off.
He tipped him off that the Germans had asked about his name, which meant that they would probably arrest him if they ever entered Belgium. And when the assumption was that Germany would enter Belgium and other places. My father had some experience with the Germans before, because in World War I, he left, he himself, when he was still 12 years old, brought his brothers and sisters to live in England, where they had family.
Was your father originally from Belgium?
My father was originally from Belgium. My grandparents were from Poland.
From Poland. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Great grandparents also.
So that's that gives it.
Yeah.
And what kind of household did you grow up in when you were living in
Patterson
in
or
Patterson or in Manhattan or in Brooklyn? I mean, was it like
my parents were, I would say, conservative Jews. My father was active in a conservative congregation. Conservative
kept
movement.
kosher in the house, but out of the house.
Yeah, right. Although my father came from a very Orthodox background, and he himself knew the service back and forth.
Yeah. Do you have any siblings? Do you have any?
I have a younger brother who's 11 years younger.
Okay.
So we almost weren't siblings. I was almost like more like an uncle to him.
Sure. Sure.
So we lived mostly in Patterson, except for a short period of time after we left New York. For a short period of time, my father was exploring moving to California, where he also had some cousins. We did go to California for a few months, came back to Patterson, and I basically grew up in Patterson.
What was it like as a Jew to grow up in Patterson in the mid-40s?
Actually, growing in Patterson was very, very good. It had an extremely active Jewish community. It had what was called then a YMHA, but it was now it would have been called the Jewish Community Center, and it was very active. There were at least 15 or 16 teenage Jewish groups in Patterson, and I was president of a couple of them.
Really?
B'nai B'rith group, a Young Judea group, a scouting group. So I was very active in all kinds of groups, and most of them were Jewish groups. Very active in high school. There was very little anti-Semitism. There was very little anti-Semitism in my high school. I experienced it in high school mostly when I had decided that through my Young Judea and Hanor Sunni experiences to go to Israel for a year. And I applied to the Board of Education to let me out of high school half a year early. I had taken some summer courses, and I had taken additional courses, and I could easily finish all my requirements. But it was very unusual for that to happen. Fortunately, one of my non-Jewish advisors was very supportive, and he pushed it through the Board of Education to allow me to graduate a semester early. So I left for Israel in December of 1949.
December of 1949.
Yeah.
But I want to go back a little bit before that.
Mm-hmm.
You said that you were active in a lot of Jewish different.
Yeah, one of them was
Young Judea.
Was Young Judea, and Young Judea had a group at. Well, I went to the first summer of Tel Yehuda, which is the national camp of Young Judea. So.
But that's where Makarov was, wasn't he? Because he was a counselor in one of these camps, and that's where he met his wife. He was a nurse.
Right. We knew each other as counselors and nurses also, and a nurse also. They actually, his wife worked in the camp that I directed at one point.
Well, you were too young.
At that time,
he was born in 1918.
Right.
He was,
No, he was what he was. I knew him as vaguely when I was 16 or 17, because he coordinated the Young Judea region in Brooklyn. And many of my friends lived in Brooklyn and Long Island, so I knew him I met him once or twice.
Yeah.
I knew of him, and I met him once or twice at that time.
And with these groups that you're involved with in Patterson, are any of them political, or are they just youth movements? Like I'm talking about, Tar opposes to Shomer Tzair, or you.
I don't think there was a Shomer Tzair yet, but there was just a Young Judea group, was the only Zionist group that was there. Although the Hanor Hatzoni group, I'll tell you about that in a moment, was in New York. But the other thing I should say is I was involved in some politics, because in high school I was involved a lot with black Americans who were friends of mine from running track and from the band and other kinds of things. And at some point we discovered that the black students were not getting jobs. So a few blacks and I organized a team, and whenever there was a job open for a teenager, they would apply and not get the job. I would apply and get the job. And we immediately sent that information to the federal government. So it was a sort of pre-civil rights kinds of activity that other Jews were involved in other parts of the country also.
You also mentioned that there was something that you remember or you recall from I don't know how old you were in 47, 48, you were 15, 16 years old.
When I the summer that I went to the first session of the Young Judea Camp, Tel Yehuda.
Tel Yehuda?
Yeah.
Tel Yehuda.
Where was it located? In upstate?
It's not in the Catskills, it's in the Adirondacks.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where Tel Yehuda was at that time. I think it was.
That's
Okay.
exactly where Josh went.
So you
could be. In any case, I went to Tel Yehuda, and the first shaliach to Young Judea came to that camp. His name was Tzvika Dagan. Tzvika lives here in Jerusalem. No, he died a few years ago. His wife's still alive. And Tzvika was one of the extraordinarily charismatic guy who could play the harmonica and dance at the same time, and taught dance, and he played an accordion. Anyway, and I identified closely with him. We became good friends, and he suggested that I go to the first session of, because Tel Yehuda was only 1 month long, the first session of a camp set up by Hanor Etzioni. Young Judea was sponsored at that time and supported by ZOA, the Zionist Organization of America, and Hadassah. Hadassah also was more closely connected to the International General Zionist Movement. And the International General Zionist Movement had a youth group called Hanor Etzioni. It's a movement here in Israel now, also still now. And Hadassah supported a group of young members of Young Judea who split off. In fact, it was some of the major leadership of Young Judea. People like Zev Klein, I don't know if you know the name, but Zev taught at the Hebrew University for many years, and others who living in Israel now, left Young Judea and moved towards Hanor Etzioni, and they set up a camp that operated for 2 months that summer. And the camp was located in a place in Poughkeepsie where Hadassah was supporting young adults who were preparing for life in Israel. There was a chavah there where people learned farming, and they also learned Hebrew, and they were members of junior groups of Hadassah, like the Junior Hadassah, I think it's called, and ZOA had a young men's group also, and those people who wanted to go on Aliyah often went to the chavah. And at the chavah they decided to set up a camp for Hanor Etzioni. So the second summer, Tzvika had suggested, since he was going to go to be the shaliach to the Hanor Etzioni camp also, he suggested that I go there also, and I went.
How old were you?
I was just 17. It was sort of old to go to camp because I had already been a counselor at another camp. In fact, I even directed a day camp when I was 15 or 16. But these camps were Zionist camps, and I was learning a lot about myself Jewishly, and a lot about Israel, and a lot about the early days of the Zionist movement. But I was also proactive in a lot of other things. So at the camp, I helped a group decide to design a major concrete stage which we could use for folk dancing. And I directed at the camp. All of us were kids directing and doing everything else. So I directed the group that built the structure, and at the time when the structure was finished, we got a call from some people in the American Jewish community who wanted to know whether they could deposit some guns there before they were taken to ship to Israel. I don't remember what the organizations were, but there were several organizations of Jews who, all over the United States who were collecting munitions that were probably World War II armaments, but other things also. They even shipped a boat that had already been taken out of commission and sent it to Palestine to bring Jews from Europe, taken past the British blockade and so on. So there were a lot of American Jews, even after the state was established, who still continued getting arms illegally in the United States because the American government boycotted the shipping of any arms to Israel. And those same American Jews were quite aware that the American government boycotted the immigration of Jews to the United States, and there were many times in which the American government refused to bomb the roads the trains that took Jews into concentration camps. So the American Jews were a little bit suspicious, leadership anyway, about the American government. Even though they loved Roosevelt, they also didn't like Roosevelt in his policies. So it was not unusual for wealthy American Jews to find places where there were things that they could get and ship to Israel. The question was, how do you ship guns when they were it was illegal at the time because of the boycott of shipping guns.
Well, there was an embargo.
There was an embargo, right.
Yeah. So what happened with these people who wanted to come and drop some guns off to some teenagers?
Well, since this farm was both the site for the camp and the site from which Hadassah trained people to make Aliyah, there were a lot of people who would be in favor of doing anything that they could to help with the arms smuggle. And when we finished building this big structure, suddenly there was a place where boxes of arms could be put and covered over with tents or whatever so that they couldn't be seen. Well, they did bring, I don't remember what the organizations were, but they brought many guns. We repacked the guns in packages that we labeled farm equipment. So we, I think, packed as much as 3 truckloads full, but we only had one that we brought goods back and forth.
That's a lot. There's a lot of guns.
Yeah, it was a lot of guns, and the packages were, I would say, something like
rifles or pistols, or
there were some rifles and many pistols. So I would say that and some machine guns. So the boxes tended to be somewhere like a meter long. We tried to box everything in the same kinds of boxes, and we made labels for them indicating what kind of farm equipment was inside them, boxed them all, and then we had to drive them to New York.
To Brooklyn, probably, no? I know there was a warehouse down on one of the guys that I interviewed, he was one of the people who ran one of the warehouses down there, but there were some in Brooklyn and some in Lower Manhattan.
Well, these didn't go to Brooklyn. These were here. So they had the issue is how, and since this was a farm, that in the truck was licensed as a truck that served the farm. We thought we could bring the guns directly to New York, and we did. We waited till we knew which union members were at the docks because many of the union members were socialists or communists, and they supported Israel very strongly because Israel had a labor government at the time. So we needed to make sure that the people at the docks would let the guns in, but we had to get them across a major highway to get them into New York. It turns out that we were only stopped once or twice, and since the truck had a driver who was in his mid-20s, and I was sitting next to him, and I was 17, it looked like we were from a farm, and they interviewed us. They asked us what was in there, and they wanted to see what was in the back, and I said, we're shipping guns. I mean, we're shipping farm equipment to Israel. They knew Israel was a farming country. They looked at the packages, at the boxes in the trunk. I think they suspected they were things that were not marked on those boxes.
These were cops, state police?
These were state police, yeah.
State police.
I think a lot of the state police were in favor of shipping things to Israel because they didn't like the British for some reason or other. They were Irish cops, yeah.
Okay.
They didn't like the British at all. So I think that they were.
They turned their cheek.
They turned their cheek and they accepted whatever we said. They looked at the things that were listed on the boxes. They looked at the inventories that we gave them. They did not open any boxes. The next thing was to make sure that the unions allowed us to take things onto the docks, and we made sure that the union people who were there were among those who supported Israel. So I think the cops knew we were bringing in arms, and I knew the union people knew we were putting arms on the boat.
Was it one truck?
It was one truck, but we made 3 trips.
3 trips.
Yeah.
How far from Patterson to?
This wasn't at Patterson. This was in the camp.
Sorry.
Near Poughkeepsie.
So how far from?
Near Poughkeepsie.
How far?
Poughkeepsie to New York City, about an hour and a half.
Okay. So you did 3 trips.
Yeah. Not all on the same day. I think we did three. I think we did it in 2 days. Probably on 2 different days.
Yeah. And you're at 17 years old at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's 1947, 48, right? It's
49, actually.
49.
Yeah.
The end of the war.
Yeah.
The war never ended.
Well, that's a whole.
Well, but it was the point was that Israel was at war, and it was after the state was established. But the boycott. Lots of people smuggled things out.
Sure. Was there any other kind of smuggling activities that you were involved in, or
no? It was not. This wasn't.
No, I'm just saying.
It was not a major. It wasn't a major activity in my life.
Yeah, you just happened to.
I happened to be there, and I played a role in building the structure on which the guns were stored, in which we repacked them.
You were all about folk dancing, not about gun running.
I think so.
I understand. And then you said to me, so you finished high school a semester early, is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you really after this gun thing that you really came here quite quickly after about half a year?
Yeah. I went back to high school and I wanted to leave. I wanted to get to Israel.
Were your parents supportive of this?
My parents were ambivalent.
Okay.
My parents were very supportive of my being a Zionist. My father was always pro-Israel. He organized some support for the Histadrut from other people in Patterson. But there was something about the youth movement that he wasn't too terribly happy about, because we didn't dress like he wanted us to dress and how I always had dressed. I was comfortable with a suit, a jacket, a tie. Once I got involved in the youth movement, it was jeans, or no, not jeans. It was khaki pants and a T-shirt, and he wondered why I hung around with all those schmutzniks.
He called them the Bolsheviks.
Schmutzniks, not Bolsheviks.
Schmutzniks is Hashomer. No, I think he called you Bolsheviks.
Oh, at one time I did that. He says,
so when
beneath all that, he was very proud of what I was doing.
When do you arrive to Israel? When are you?
Well, I came to Israel in December of 1949.
December of 1949.
And with a group of about 15 or 20 kids who were in the camp with me.
So you guys all knew each other?
We all knew each other, yeah.
Okay.
So some of our members were part of the Marathon. You familiar with it? 3 of our members had gone to the Marathon in the fall. But Hanora Tzuni started its own Marathon that year. And I guess there were 13 or 15 or 16 of us who were part of it, and they were when we lived initially at the Israel Goldstein Youth Village, which was at that time a Youth Aliyah village.
Right.
And there was a Youth Aliyah group there from Hungary. Young kids were a couple of years younger than we were.
So you witnessed the aftermath of misplaced young kids from after the war, basically. Also,
yeah, absolutely. It was very eye-opening to us. Now, one or two of the members of my group had actually survived the war in Europe, and they came to America to be with family, and then a couple of years later, were with us going to Israel.
Where?
From the Goldstein Youth Village where we lived.
Yeah, but you left by boat from New York?
Yeah.
2-3 week journey, something like that? Or
it was 2 week journey,
2 weeks.
Yeah.
And
it's strange.
Yeah.
Strange that it would take so long, but it was,
sure.
And nobody was going by plane yet.
No.
So.
What's your impression when you first get here? Like you're like, right, it's like the war's been over for what, like a half a year?
Yeah. My first impression when we docked at Haifa, first of all, seeing Haifa felt from the ship, it felt as I had read people coming on the Exodus, or on other ships, and it felt. I think that we had not the same background ourselves, but we had much of the same emotion when we saw the outskirts of the port. We came in. We were suddenly totally welcomed. People almost asked us a very few questions about who we were. All they knew is we were Jews and we were coming back, and even if it was for a short time, we just felt totally welcome. It wasn't like experiences that I had with border people in the past, especially my recollection of passing through New York into the United States as a child. This was a total welcome, and we explained that we were going to Jerusalem for Machon, and they immediately helped us locate the bus that was waiting for us, and we came to Jerusalem. The Goldstein Youth Village was at that time exactly where it is now, but it only had very few buildings. I wouldn't say more than 4 or 5 buildings, so it wasn't.
It's on the end of Chernikovsky, right?
Yeah. Right. The front of it faced a couple of houses, and the back of it faced no man's land. And so you had to be careful of where you went, because no man's land had did have.
Snipers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were careful, but coming into Jerusalem was, I would say, coming down and blocking in the street. But coming down to Jerusalem was down not the Yaffo Street, but you have to get to the Yaffo Street. But what's the big street that?
King George?
No, entrance to the city?
Chernichovsky Street.
Chernichovsky.
Going up from the village.
Yeah. So we walked along Chernichovsky Street about a half hour. First thing that showed us that we were coming to the center of Jerusalem was there was a falafel maker, and in the same place where there's now a little gas station with that sells food.
Okay.
So they still sell food in the same location, and from there we could walk towards the old city, and Machane Yehuda. Machane Yehuda was totally destroyed. The walls of the old city
was on the other side.
It was on the other side, and the Jordanians paraded back and forth across the wall, and they shot towards people who wanted to go into Machane Yehuda to explore, and I think probably they did it because they didn't want to see how the insides of those buildings had been totally discombobulated and everything had been taken out and stolen. Interesting story. About 10 years later, after the old city was open to Jews, and we all would go there shop as people go shopping there now, in one of the Arab shops, there was a picture about this big, which to me looked like it was something that came from Vezalel, probably a piece of Vezalel art, and it was clearly Jewish, and it clearly got there because somebody had looted it 10 or 12 years earlier, and was selling it now. We bought it.
Yeah.
It's Herzl.
It was Herzl.
Was it? Yeah.
Balcony in Basel.
Yeah. So anyway, so I can't say much more about smuggling.
That's fine. I mean,
I basically was very young.
Yeah, and you were also, but you knew what you were doing. I mean, you were explained.
Yeah,
you were old enough to understand.
Oh, no question.
Yeah.
We did this with complete understanding that we could
be caught. Yeah.
But we also understood that there were people on the way, like the British cops, the Irish cops who didn't like the British, and the socialists who were members of the Union.
Sure.
So all this tells you, I think, is that a lot of other people did minimal jobs that helped the movement of equipment. Now, when I was in Israel, and my father was a sportsman. He one of his sports as a young man was marksmanship.
Okay.
And he was the marksman champion in Belgium. So he taught me how to use guns as a kid, just going to a shooting gallery and so on. And because of that, when I came to Israel, I lived on kibbutzim. The first one was Tel Yitzchak, and I was asked to be a guard So I was a shomer at night and did normal work during the day, and 2 or 3 nights I was a shomer. But this was a time when Israel was also buying smuggled in guns from Europe, and they were coming mostly from Czechoslovakia. So the rifle that I was carrying, Shmirah, was a Czech rifle, and other things were being smuggled in from Czechoslovakia at the same time, and we would sometimes be with the Haganah members along the shoreline, bringing things in and bringing the guns and repackaging them
Sure.
On the kibbutz and moving them to places where the Haganah used them for defense purposes. And that's, so I guess I was on the 2 ends of that story, but there were just minor tasks. I knew about guns, so when they came from Czechoslovakia, we checked them to see whether they were any good, whether they needed to be, the sights need to be realigned, whether we needed to change the barrels from one gun to another, and so I did some of that at night.
Tell me, just out of curiosity, what was your mother tongue?
French.
French.
Mm-hmm. It could have been Flemish, but it was French.
Antwerp is Flemish.
Yeah. You know a lot about.
Well, actually, I was just there. So I have a friend who I visited there.
But my
Where? In Antwerp?
Yeah.
My parents
My parents
spoke Flemish when they didn't want me to understand. But I had a grandmother who had spent much of her life in Germany, so she spoke German, and so I could understand Flemish also from knowing her German.
I think we're done. It was short, but we definitely.
It wasn't that much.
No, but the Makarovs have quite a story.
Yes, well, the Makarovs, as I told you, let me just turn this.